Hello dear students. As we all know, in the previous class, we began the topic of colonial loot. We are in the process of learning how the East India Company and the British government led to the disintegration of the Indian economy. In the last class, I taught you how the East India Company got Diwani rights of 3 villages, thereby reducing the flow of gold or bullion the into the Indian administration. Now in this class we will learn about further trade implications and barriers put up by the Britishers that led to the deindustrialization of Indian economy. As we all know, 70% of the trade was dominated by India. Indian industries flourished greatly, providing the Indian market with sustainable goods, and also a substantial amount of these goods were transported to the exported to various European countries. In European region, the commodities from India, especially the Indian textiles, were of prime consumption. They were a type of luxury goods for the Europeans. Now we will study post Battle of Plassey. There was another battle called as Battle of Buxar. Via after these subsequent battles, the East India Company began interfering in the commerce of the country. They began interfering in India's administration only related to the trade, only specific to the trade part of it. See, in the last class we learned that the gold or bullion was substituted by the revenue collected from the villagers. Now we'll further learn how the inverted trade policy of Britishers affected the industries of India. Now what is inverted trade policy? For example, a country A is manufacturing a product, let us say a pen. Now the industry of country A has produced a pen. Now it is the ambition of this pen maker to export this to various other countries. Let's say country B. Country B, there is a demand for pens. They cannot locally produce pens, therefore they have to import pens from country A. Now, as we all know, the trade is facilitated by traders or merchants. Now, what happens when the pen is put for export? Firstly, before exporting it to the country B, this pen will be subjected to export duties. Now, what are export duties? Say for every product that company A exports to company B, the merchant will have to pay a certain X amount of money to the government of country A as an export duty, because the merchant is indulge in export. Therefore, for this pen to leave the territory of A, this pen will garner a export duty X. Now, when this product, say pen, reaches country B, country B will not simply import the pen. Country B will levy something called as import duty. Import duty is the price paid by the merchant to the government of the country B in order to import the product. Say there is a shop in company B. this shop wants to buy the pen. Firstly, this merchant will have paid export duty to country A and should have put it on a ship to reach the port of country B. When this pen reaches the port of country B shall levy import duty on this shopkeeper. This shopkeeper who is importing the pen from country A will pay the import duty to country B. So this is how the governments of the producing company and the exporting company and the importing company levy taxes on trade. So this is the normal procedure of trade and its duties. Now what Britishers did was, we had India and we had the Britain or the United Kingdom, home of the East India Company and Britishers. Then there was another segment, Europe and other regions. Now, when India would export something to Britain, firstly the East India Company merchants always paid a import duty to the Indian kings. But post Battle of Buxar, when the British East India Company got territorial authority of India, see, they majorly captured regions that flourished in trade, such as Bengal. See, Bengal had a port. See, Bombay had a port. Machilipatnam was a port. Since the East India Company was interested in trade, they began their territorial endeavors in regions where trade would occur. Now, since India, what Britishers did was, they made the export duty nil. Even today, India, the government of India does not impose any duty for export of trade. That is to facilitate the Indian producers to produce more and export more in search of forex reserve. So what Britishers did was, they made the export duty as zero. Therefore, money was not going. The East India Company merchants were not subjected to pay any money to the government of the prevailing times. Now what they did was, when the East India Company traded to Britain, here Britain, these shopkeepers had to pay import duties. What Britishers did was, they put here the import duty is also nil. So if the pen is being produced here at 10 rupees, the maximum the pen would be sold in Britain for 12 rupees. 2 rupees being the profit of the East India Company. There was no subjected to import duty. Therefore, rampant trade would be facilitated. That means the Indians other than East India Company, were several merchants. These merchants would not gain a profit. The British government would not gain a profit. When the Indian commodities were sold to other European regions, such as Spain, your France, Netherlands, etc., they put exorbitant export duty. If India had to trade with Britain, the export duty is zero. But if India had to trade with Europeans and other regions other than UK, the export duty was almost 100%, which meant that now Indians would not prefer selling their products to Europe, because for a 10 rupees pen, they would have to pay 10 rupees as export duty to the East India Company. So therefore, this discouraged the trade from India to European regions, whereas since the export duty to Britain was nil, most merchants favored the export of Indian commodity to Britain, UK. A slight mistake here, the import duty. That import duty which was 0, I told you it was only for East India Company. For other traders, for private traders who wanted to trade to Europe, the import duty was also excessive, say again 100%. So if an Indian merchant wanted to trade to Europe, that is the region other than the United Kingdom, they would have to pay 20 rupees, 10 rupees as a export duty. Whereas if Indian merchants had to trade to UK, they did not have to pay any duty. Whereas, see, after when products other than the East India Company, other private traders were to sell their products to Britain, the import duty would be excessive. That means 10 rupees pen would cost them, would become 20 rupees in the market. So this meant that the Indian commodity was becoming excessively costly in Britain, which meant that there were no buyers for the pen. This 10 rupees pen would not be imported by the Britishers because there was excessive import duty levied on the pen, making the pen costly, therefore reducing the consumption of pen. If this pen was sold for 12 rupees, then a lot of people would have bought it in Britain. But since the excessive import duty of 100% is being levied on Indian goods, the pen becomes costlier. That means it becomes 20 rupees, and therefore there is a reduction in demand. So via these trade tariffs, the Britishers made sure that the Indian commodities had lost their demand in the Britain and also in Europe. Here, Indians would not want to trade to Europe because there was high export price. Britishers would not import things from India because there was excessive import duties. Therefore, the demand of Indian products saw a huge fall in demand. Now, see, as we all know, the prime export of India was textiles. Now, what Britishers did was, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, they made mass productions. Mass production of commodities. When say, if Indians could produce 10 pieces of cloth in a month, these factories would produce 1,000 pieces of cloth in a month. So it increased the rate of production. Now, thanks to the tariffs levied by the East India Company and the British government, the demand of Indian textiles fell in Britain, and that demand was replaced by the British made cloths. And it was not only in Britain, it happened all over Europe. All over Europe, people started buying British cloths rather than Indian cloths because the import duty had become exorbitant, and also export duty to other countries had become exorbitant. Whereas if Britain wanted to, if the British wanted to export something to India, India would not levy any import duties. Therefore, the British goods which were entering India became cheaper. They were not subjected to any import duties. Therefore, firstly the revenue of India reduced and the market of India began to flood with the British goods. So this is called as inverted tariff. When you want to export to Britain, they levy 100% or exorbitant import tax duty. But if you want to import from Britain, the import duty is 0. So this is how via these methodologies the demand for Indian products reduced in Europe and Britain, and also the flooding of Indian market with British goods began. Now, see, East India Company made a fortune trading in India. Now, looking at this, there was a lobby, the Lancashire lobby. Lancashire is a major textile producing hub in England. Now, majority of the factory owners in Lancashire were lords. These lords are a type of noble people of the British government. Now, these lords, thanks to the Industrial Revolution, had made an surplus amount of, had produced surplus amount of textiles. Therefore, they were hoarding a lot of commodities. The Europe and Britain itself was not able to satisfy the supply. They needed new markets. So therefore, the Lancashire lobby lobbied the government of Britain to make the East India Company, they forced the East India Company to sell their products in India. Already the Indian market was getting flooded with British goods. Already the Indian commodity had lost its demand in Europe. The Indian industries were struggling to make ends meet, and the final death blow came thanks to these Lancashire lobby lords who forced the East India Company. They forced the East India Company that for a span of years, this company had to dump all the excessive cloths or commodities that the Industrial Revolution had resulted. Now, East India Company had no choice but to implement the program. Now, since the company was at a loss, because there was no import duty in India, the price of cloth would be the same in India, and within India there were a lot of industries who were satisfying the local demand. So what East India Company followed was the practice of predatory pricing. Now, what is predatory pricing? Say, Indian manufacturers sold a piece of cloth for 100 rupees. Because the demand in Europe had died out, there was no export and import had become very costly. Therefore, the Indian industries had no choice but to sell within the borders of the country. And thanks to the predatory tariff policies of the British, India could not even engage in trade with other countries. So therefore, Indians sold, say, for example, a piece of cloth in India was for 100 rupees. What East India Company did was, they sold the same, again a piece of cloth for just 20 rupees. So let's say not 20, 50 rupees, which is almost half of what Indian industrialists are selling. Now in the Indian market there were two commodities. One indigenously prepared in India, the other one which was imported from the Britain, which was the product of industrial revolution. Now since there is a huge gap, all Indians started preferring the East India Company traded cloth because it was almost half the price of the Indian produced commodity. This meant that the industries, since now there is no person, at least before the Lancashire lobby, the Indian industrialists satisfied were able to sell within India. Now post the predatory pricing of East India Company, the entire industrial system was wiped out. People started selling their industries. No one was interested in making industries because having industries meant, firstly, trade facilitates industries. If there is a flourishing trade, industries come up, and if there is a flourishing demand within the country. So if when these both were curtailed by the East India Company, the Indian manufacturing structure took a hit, and the Indian manufacturing had become very less. There were very few industries. So after a period of time, when the East India Company, here East India Company is selling at a loss, this extra, say 50 rupees, they had to pay from their own pockets to the British government or the Lancashire lobby. Now upon time, when the industries of India declined completely, when there were no local producers, the East India Company increased its price from 50 to 150 rupees. Before, the Indians sold at 100. East India Company initially sold for 50, and after it made sure that the Indian industry was wiped out, there was no choice for Indians except to import from Britain. They increased the price of these commodities up to 150 or 200, making a huge profit, also, and also destroying the industrial setup of India. These major trade practices and predatory pricing were responsible for the deindustrialization of India. Since its independence, India has faced a major economic problem, in the sense the manufacturing sector of our country is not well developed enough. It is the India thrives on the service sector, but for employment to occur, for jobs to be present within an economy, manufacturing sector is very important. Due to the British policies of predatory pricing and tariffs, the industrial system within India was destroyed and it never really picked up. So therefore a lot of stress was on the government. So that is how certain policies of the company and Britishers led to the deindustrialization of India. Thank you.